very much for the kind introduction and the honorable invitation to this meeting. First of all, I have to say something about my new title. I'm talking still about industrial radical enzymes, but I was asked to select a different one, not that what is written in the program. I will talk about an electron bifurcation, which is an old system in the respiratory chain, but was recently discovered by us that it all occurs in anaerobic bacteria in a completely soluble system. I will start with the aerobes, the catabolism of glucose. And as you know, humans and other aerobes are oxidized by glycolysis in the citrate cycle. The oxidants are NAD and ubiquinone, and thereby 4 ATP are formed via substrate level phosphorylation. In the reductive part, where these oxidants are regenerated, oxygen is reduced to water, and thereby up to 34 ATP are conserved by ion gradient phosphorylation. And I will go more in detail into this ion gradient phosphorylation, also called electron transport phosphorylation. And thereby a proton motive force is generated. And this is then converted to ATP, as you know, by the small electron motor ATP synthase. Now there are several methods how used by nature to establish a proton motive force. That means to pump protons from the inside of the mitochondria or the bacterium to the outside. And one method is the well-known full cycle, was originally discovered by the Nobel Prize winner Peter Mitchell, and thereby the quinone, the green quinone, is reduced by NADH via complex 1, by succinate via complex 2, or from acyl-CoA via electron transferring flavin protein. That is one of the major topics of my talk. I will come to it later. In order to reduce this quinone, you take 2 protons from the inside of the mitochondria. Then the reduced quinone swims to the outside, where it's oxidized by complex 3 of the respiratory chain, and finally by cytochrome C, and thereby 2 protons are released to the outside, and the oxidized quinone swims back to the inside. So we have a partial full cycle, but this is only half of the story. In reality, 4 protons are pumped through the membrane, and this is done by electron bifurcation. You see here that it's the same as shown before, but now the quinone is not directly oxidized with the quinone to the quinone, but it's oxidized at the outer Q side, QO side, in the complex 3 of the respiratory chain, and thereby 1 electron is going to the oxidant, to the iron sulfur cluster, or reaches the iron sulfur cluster, and then further to cytochrome C. As soon as the iron sulfur cluster is loaded with 1 electron, it switches over that the next electron cannot go also to this iron sulfur cluster. It has to go upwards into a more negative cytochrome E, and thereby reduces quinone at the inner side into a semiquinone. And this is repeated by the second quinone, and so we get an extra ubiquinone, and thereby 2 protons are taken up from the inside, and the oxidation of 2 nodes at the outside yields 4 protons. So the efficiency of the Boole cycle is doubled just by this electron bifurcation. We call it bifurcation because the node redox potential of about 70 millivolts bifurcates to the more positive potential cytochrome C and to the more negative potential at the higher energy to the node. And then it's recycled, we get the proton 4 proton force. And we have here the Ariska and sulfur cluster acts as switch. It prevents that both electrons go to the easier, more positive side. Here you see this electron bifurcation comes from 4 Latin full club. Now I come to the anaerobic bacteria. The anaerobes are different. They are not. They cannot use carbohydrates and proteins by one organism to completely oxidize it or reduce it to methane and CO2. And they need several organisms. And they form the anaerobic food chain, which I call a treasure trove of exciting enzymes, as you will see. And thereby, in the first step, the carbohydrates and proteins are hydrolyzed by exoenzymes, and then the sugars and amino acids are fermented to CO2, hydrogen, acetate, propionate and glutarate, and other short-chain fatty acids, and ammonia. And that is the fermentative step. And then in the next step, we have acetogenesis. The CO2 and hydrogen are converted to acetate. The short-chain fatty acids are oxidized to acetate and CO2. And the hydrogen, and this is only possible if the hydrogen, which is also formed, is immediately consumed by the methanogens. Otherwise, this reaction is not possible. So the hydrogen concentration must be kept extremely low. But we mainly are concerned with this fermentative part. I have to mention these bacteria live in our intestine. They live in the sewage plants or in anaerobic sediments and in all anaerobic niches. Here you see one major component of the anaerobic oxidative change, which is ferridoxin. Ferridoxin is a small protein with a molecular mass of about 6 kilodalton, and it contains 2 propane iron-sulfur clusters. Red is iron, yellow is sulfur. And say to take up 1 electron. We have such an unpaired electron, which is very sensitive to oxygen, and so this ferridoxin, it cannot exist under air for a long time. It has an extremely negative redox potential of about 420 millivolts. And we discovered recently a new enzyme which is can be regarded as a component of the anaerobic respiratory chain, in which reduced ferridoxin reduces NAD to give, and thereby energy is released. There is a redox difference of about 100 millivolts, which is converted to a proton, to a sodium motion force, or in some other organisms under proton motion force. This is called RNF because it's called, involved in nitrogen fixation. It's a reversed reaction. You can reduce you can oxidize NAD with ferric oxide. It's a reverse, driven by a proton motive force, and thereby ferric oxide is formed for nitrogen fixation. That is the old argument. And now, the anaerobic bacteria, Clostridia, are many of them synthesize butyrate. And this is the standard synthesis of butyrate, which occurs in many textbooks of biochemistry. Acetyl-CoA is condensed to acetoacetyl-CoA, reduced to hydroxybutyryl-CoA, and then dehydrated to protyl-CoA, reduced again, and finally butyrate is formed. You see the two reductants reducing reactions. Here the redox potential is not very high. This question mark is an error of the projection. And but here between minus 320 millivolts and this reaction, we have a difference of about minus 300 millivolts, which could be used in energy conservation. And already Fritz Lippmann, pioneer in biochemistry, he suggested that there could be an energy conservation, but nobody had an idea how this could be. So we have shown that this enzyme is not a membrane enzyme, it's in the cytoplasm, and so it was really unknown how this works. And so once I had the idea that there it could be coupled with the reduction of ferric oxide. So we need now 2 NADH, and this high potential difference could be used, the free energy which is formed with this reaction, could be used to reduce ferric oxide. And so on, this was indeed shown that this is possible. The first, we purified this enzyme system and found it contains 3 components. The alpha is related to butyryl-CoA dehydrogenase and acyl-CoA dehydrogenase, and beta and gamma is related to electron transferring flavoprotein. And here you see when we added protyl-CoA and NAD, and there was no reaction, but when we added ferridoxin and hydrogenase, we got this reaction, and we got the formation of hydrogen. And the hydrogenase was added in order to recycle the oxidized ferridoxin. And so we were able to reduce protyl-CoA, but this is coupled to the reduction of ferridoxin, which then reduces protons to give hydrogen. And so you see, only in the complete system we get good activity. And so we think it's like this. We have a 3-component system. The alpha subunit is a protyl-CoA reductase or butyryl-CoA dehydrogenase, and then we have the gamma and the beta subunit is electron transfer flavoprotein. It could that one of these subunits bind NADH and now bifurcate the electron to the more positive protyl-CoA and to the more negative ferric oxide. And here you see the structure of the human electron transferring flower protein. This doesn't bifurcate, it just acts as electron carrier. It interacts with acyl-CoA dehydrogenase and is reduced, ETFH2, and then it swims into the mitochondrial membrane, the inner membrane, and there's oxidized with quinone, and we get reduced with quinone. So this flavin has only an electron carrier. That is the beta subunit in light blue, and in darker blue is the gamma subunit. And here you see a molecular fossil that is ALP. The structure was already known 15 years ago, but nobody knows what this does. Probably it's just a remainder, because last week, almost 2 weeks ago, we got the structure of the Clostridial ETF, and you see here we have the same. We have the gamma subunit in brown and the beta subunit in green. And there it is the FID, like in the human ETF, but instead of ALP, exactly at the same position, there is another FID. And what is the function now? And according to the human enzyme, we think that the butyl-CoA dehydrogenase sits here. And like in the human enzyme, we have here a region without secondary structure. And so we think this is a switch region. It could act folded like a butterfly. And so this FAD beta could come in contact with the FAD alpha and gamma, and there is an electron transfer possible. So it thinks that the NAD probably behind this FAD and the ferredoxin in front of this FAD, and then as soon as this FAD gamma is reduced, the beta FAD folds to the gamma FAD, transfers one electron, which is further transferred to the butyl-CoA dehydrogenase, and the remaining electron reduces ferredoxin. As shown in the next slide, we have the gamma FAD is reduced by NADH, and then one electron goes to the more positive FAD beta, which is similar to flavodoxin, therefore comes this redox potential, and the other electron remains. The switch now goes back, so only one electron can be transferred, the other remains and reduces ferredoxin, and then the FID, this semiquinone, transfers the electron further to the butyl-CoA dehydrogenase, and finally to protein-nucleotide. So we think this bifurcation could work. And now we couple this reduction of protein-nucleotide together with this RNF, which I showed you earlier, and now we can have a simple reduction of protein-nucleotide by NADH to butyl-CoA NAD, but we think that as a proton or sodium ion motive force is generated. Here we have only if we have a complete system, we get good activity. Here are the controls. So we have here an anaerobic respiratory chain. It's not so long as a mitochondrial respiratory chain, but it is possible to do some electron transport phosphorylation like in the mitochondria. Here again, we have also our bifurcation system, 2 NADH, one reduces protonyl CoA to butyryl CoA, the other to ferredoxin. And then we have this recycling to generate a proton multiforce or sodium multiforce, or we use the ferredoxin to reduce protons to hydrogen. Now we can now use this system to explain other energy metabolism, another metabolism, for example, in Clostridium joyville. This bacterium ferments 6-ethanol and 3-acetate to 3-butyrate C4 and 1 caproate C6 and hydrogen. And this was also discovered 50 years ago, and later it was discovered that hydrogen is formed, but nobody knows how NADH formed by oxidation of ethanol can give rise to hydrogen. And then it was known that the system is somehow driven by the reduction of acetyl-CoA and acetate to butyrate and caproate, but how this is achieved, nobody knows. Now it's clear the reduction of butyrate to caproate, there is 5 reductions of a double bond, gives rise to 10 ferredoxin. 4 can be used to form this hydrogen. 6 can be reduce NAD back to NADH, and we get the proton or sodium multiforce. And now we can understand, we get 1 ATP by substrate level phosphorylation, and we get 3 times the proton multiforce. That's almost 2 ATP, and now we can understand the energy metabolism of this organism. Another thing is methanogenesis. In methanogens, this bacteria, this archaea, CO2 is finally reduced to methane via the formate and formaldehyde and methanol intermediates. And it was always a problem how the reduction of CO2 is performed, because the ferredoxin needed to reduce CO2 cannot be produced from hydrogen, because usually the hydrogen pressure is too low, and ferredoxin has to have a very negative redox potential. But now we can use this last enzyme of methanogenesis, the reduction of this disulfide, which has a more positive potential by hydrogen, and this bifurcates to ferredoxin, and ferredoxin reduces the CO2. Now the bioenergetics of methanogens, archaea which produce methane, is now also understood. Now here again is sheen, hydrogen, reduction of the disulfide drives with the reduction of ferredoxin. And finally, I want to mention that Schutt and Adams published a paper about a new hydrogenase. Usually hydrogenases work with ferredoxin, but it just didn't work with ferredoxin. It didn't work with NADH, but it worked with both. And this makes sense because now all the reducing agents can be converted to hydrogen and reoxidized with protons. And so we can have here, it has no conforcation, we have no bifurcation, we have a conforcation, goes together. But this system is reversible, and it could explain the acetogenesis. That's also a problem which hasn't been solved in bioenergetics. as I mentioned earlier, hydrogen and CO2. Hydrogen reduces CO2 to acetate, and thereby energy is formed and converted to ATP, but nobody knows how it works. We still don't know it, I have to say, but we still know that hydrogen can bifurcate positively to NADH and negatively to ferredoxin. And now we have ferredoxin to reduce CO2 to the formate level and to CO. We need 2 ferredoxin, or 4 ferredoxins, 4 electrons, and 2 NADH we need to reduce the formyl state via the methylate state to the methyl state. And then methyl plus CO gives acetate. We still don't know the bioenergetics yet, because here we need ATP and here we get ATP, so there is no net formation. But we think that here this reaction has a very positive redox potential that could be also used for another bifurcation. Now, another aspect is shown here at the origin of life in the primordial world. It has been suggested there's only CO2 available and probably hydrogen, which is formed by oxidation, by reduction of water with iron 2 in the interior of the Earth, and this comes up, and so it could be the first step also for the formation of acetate at the origin of life. With this, I want to close my lecture and want to acknowledge my co-workers which were involved directly in this field and more indirectly, and our collaborations. And I want to thank you very much for your vast attention. This is my international group.
Thank you for your presentation. Now, do you have any questions for this presentation?